When I was a kid, the Pathfinder was sort of like Nissan's answer to the Toyota 4Runner, a rugged 4x4 that could tackle a trail and then take you to work. A lot has changed since then, at least when it comes to the Pathfinder. The 4Runner is just about the same as it's always been. And the only path you're finding in one of these days is a gravel one. Now, this Rock Creek version brings it at least a little closer to its roots with rugged looks and a few features that should genuinely come in handy off the beaten path. But best of all, this Pathfinder blends that newfound appetite for adventure with all the characteristics that make it perfectly suited for family life. For more expert car reviews, don't forget to share our channel and subscribe so you can catch some of this and maybe even a little of that. Look, I am not naive, and I really don't think the product planners at Nissan are either. I could probably count on one hand the number of people who are going to buy a Pathfinder Rock Creek and actually go off-roading, but that is not the point of this. The point is that these things are so incredibly popular these days, these pseudo off-road rigs. That's exactly why this new and improved Rock Creek version of the Pathfinder exists. Because don't forget, the last generation Pathfinder also had a Rock Creek trim, but it was really just some styling upgrades. Nothing about it was adventurous. I thought it looked cool, but this looks way cooler. This actually does look rugged. It's got those beadlock look wheels. Of course, they aren't legit. It's got that roof rack, as well as all that black cladding along the bottom. That's supposed to give it the illusion that this has more ride height than it actually does. It actually helps hide the fact that this doesn't even have 8 inches of ground clearance overall. And keep in mind, if you take a look at an SUV like the Subaru Ascent or the Outback or Forester, minus their wilderness trims, all of those have 8.7 inches. So this thing does sit a little low to the ground. Now, technically, this one does have more ground clearance than the rest of the lineup because it has this tweaked suspension system that's supposed to be off-road tuned. One thing it does makes the ride extremely rigid. I mean, aside from the Toyota 4Runner that's actually still body on frame, this has to be the stiffest, most truck-like ride around. And it's not that I hate it all the time, but it's definitely not the most civilized, especially on a day like today. I'm sure you can hear and you can see all this snow and slush on the road. But where the plows have gone over and left these rough patches, they're really reverberating through the chassis and up into the cabin. And the same goes with pressure cracks and potholes. The rest of the Pathfinder lineup, maybe it's good, but this one, not very smooth. Well, now that we are on some smoother pavement, I can talk about something else that stands out about this Pathfinder, and that is the steering. It is very heavy, but I actually like it. And one thing that's cool about it is it doesn't change how responsive this thing is, which is actually surprisingly sharp. A lot of SUVs like this, they feel kind of sloppy, loose steering, no feel whatsoever. This is still an electric power steering setup, but it's just got a little bit of weight and resistance to it. It's also progressive, so the faster you get, the more you can feel. I really do like that. I've heard some complaints about the all-terrain tires that come on this, changing the way it handles. This one is wisely on winters. Again, conditions are the evidence of that. But even with these winter tires, I have no complaints about the steering. Yeah, that is personal preference, but I'm telling you right now, it's so much nicer to actually know what's happening than in some of these modern vehicles that just have no steering feel whatsoever. Now, this thing uses the same 3.5 liter V6 as the rest of the Pathfinder lineup, but it is interesting because it's got some computer tuning that allows it to run on premium grade gas, and it makes a little bit more power, but you got to be crazy to put premium in the tank of this thing. Yes, it will still run on regular, And that means it makes the same, I don't know what it is, 284 horsepower and 259 pound-feet of torque versus the 295 and 270 pound-feet of torque. 11 pound-feet of torque and 11 extra horsepower. That's what you get when you put premium in the tank. Stick with 87 octane. Trust me. I can't really see any scenario where you're going to need to spend that kind of money. Maybe when you're towing, but even then, I think this thing's got more than enough guts. Even in eco mode, I actually really do like this motor. You put your foot into it, doesn't sound great, but especially right around 4,800 RPM where it hits that peak torque, it pulls really hard. There's that nice surge, and it really is a nice reminder of the greatness that is naturally aspirated engines. I really do like that. The 9-speed automatic transmission, it's great as well. Sometimes it's a little slow to respond, but for the most part, it knows what you want to do. When you get your foot into it because you're looking to pass or merge, it responds, it drops down a gear or two. Really good. It's also fairly efficient. Now, officially, it's rated for 11.1 liters per 100 kilometers combined. That's pretty average for the segment. Some do a little better and some do a little worse. I was doing better than that earlier this week, but then we got hammered by a snowstorm. I had this thing in the snow setting, the drive mode here, in the snow setting, which gives you more of a torque split. More of it is sent to the rear wheels. Felt a little more confident that way, and it was quick to add to the fuel tally. And now I'm up around 12 liters per 100 kilometers after driving through all of this wicked winter weather. That also brings me to my next point. Nissan says that the Pathfinder is 4-wheel drive. I say it's all-wheel drive, and I know some of you out there might say, Dan, there's no difference. And you're mostly right, but usually the difference is defined as a 4-wheel drive system is engageable. You can select the gearing, low range, high range. You can switch it from front-wheel drive or rear-wheel drive to 4-wheel drive. Whereas an all-wheel drive system is fully automatic. Maybe you get some drive modes that are gonna adjust the mapping, change things up a bit. That's what this is, and so I am calling this an all-wheel drive system, but that doesn't change the fact that it does seem very effective, and it knows where to send torque and when to do it. Like I said, I think this thing looks great. Tons of presence, and a big part of it is this semi-gloss paint that you can only get on the Pathfinder Rock Creek, but it is well worth the $300 it costs on its own, or even the $950 if you want to get it with a black roof. Super cool. Something else that's cool but also functional, this big chunky roof rack. Although prospective campers should take note, only 220 pounds of capacity, so no rooftop tent set up here. But either way, when you want to toss stuff up there or get it down, very easy thanks to these big wide steps just inside the rear doors. They're even big enough for me to get 2 feet on there. It means you can climb up here, throw some stuff up, take it off, very easy. This isn't the only SUV to have steps like that, but it doesn't make them any less functional. Something that makes the Pathfinder more functional than the average SUV like this, 6,000 pounds of towing capacity. That's about 1,000 more than rivals like the Honda Pilot, Kia Telluride, and Hyundai Palisade. And yes, there is a hitch that's standard on this Rock Creek version. It's worth noting that there's a bit less cargo room than those three, especially with the 3rd row upright. But then again, that's where that roof rack is gonna come in handy. You know, all things considered, this is a very roomy 3-row. Yeah, cargo space might not be as good as some of its competitors, but as far as passenger space, it's great. I can fit in the 3rd row, which I couldn't in the Palisade that I reviewed not too long ago. Some of you may have already seen that, and if you haven't, go ahead and watch it when you're done here. This 3rd row is way roomier. The 2nd row is good, and up here, I feel great. I also love the fact that this Rock Creek trim does not have a sunroof. Now, video producer extraordinaire Will Johnson, he's not so happy with how dark it is in here, and I do side with him a little bit. All this black on the headliner, all the black upholstery and plastics in here, they do make it really hard to shoot, but that is very much an us problem and not so much a you problem. So as far as space, your family is gonna find more than enough room. There's also lots of good storage solutions. This pass-through cubby under here, I love the cup holders in either door. It's a nice way if you have 3 people sitting across that second row. They're not without cup holders that are stashed in that fold down center section that has this, but if you have 3 people back there, you can use those cup holders in the doors. And even if you don't, they're just way more convenient, at least in my opinion. Now, that doesn't mean Nissan is out of the woods as far as my criticisms in here, because I do have a few. The first one, some of the plastics in here, not so great. Don't get me wrong, I'm happy that there's no fake chrome plastic door handles or any of that stuff, but some of the plastic in here, like around those door handles, as well as down here on the console, around that drive mode dial and the gear selector, it's very cheap feeling and it's prone to scratches. You can see some subtle scratches in here already, and this only has a few thousand kilometers on the odometer. Family life, I feel like it's going to take its toll. Same with this fabric on the seats, doesn't feel that great. But another problem I have, this just really doesn't have much character, especially when you take a look at the outside. It really pops, it looks really cool. And then in here, yeah, you get some orange stitching, you get these Rock Creek logos that are embroidered in the seats, as well as this console bin lid. I like that a lot, but everything else, it's just very dour, doesn't look all that cool. And even if you take a look at the Toyota RAV4 Trail, there's some orange accents that just really help to spruce up that cabin. I think Nissan could have done the same here. Could have maybe replaced some of this gloss black plastic around the infotainment and climate controls with some orange, maybe this shelf over here, even around those door handles. Really, that would have helped to elevate the experience. That is a big complaint I have. The other one, maybe it's just because I drove the Mercedes EQS SUV with that massive hyper screen not too long ago, but this 8-inch touchscreen, it does seem kind of small. Part of the problem, I think, is how wide the cabin is, but it does look pretty tiny. On the plus side, it's very responsive. It doesn't have much in terms of features, but the graphics are very crisp, especially when I'm using my Apple CarPlay. Nice and bright, and the response is good. That is probably more important when you're running your maps, your music, whatever. It's nice to be able to quickly do things, and it responds exactly when you need it to. You're sitting at a light and you want to switch songs or maybe punch in a navigation direction. It's very, very responsive. Otherwise, so-so feature count, no navigation. That's fine with me. It's got satellite radio, those smartphone connections. It's also got a built-in Wi-Fi hotspot, although the one in this tester, it's not set up, and that's a little bit of a disappointment because I love testing that stuff out. It's also got a heated steering wheel, heated front seats, 6-speaker stereo. One of the biggest things I love as far as features, proximity sensors on all 4 door handles. The tailgate is also height programmable, and there's a centralized close and lock button. Love to see that. Not enough vehicles have that, so that is really great. Is it worth the 54 grand before tax that Nissan wants for this thing? That's up to you to decide. It does seem a little expensive, but then keep in mind, the Honda Pilot Trail Sport, that's a direct competitor, that's $60,000. Now, still, that is expensive, but if you don't need a 3-row, don't forget there's that RAV4 Trail I just talked about, as well as the wilderness versions of both the Subaru Forester and the Subaru Outback. Those have even more ground clearance, lots of off-road goodies, and they look cool too, but I would not take this off my shopping list. Again, when you look at it next to vehicles like that Pilot Trail Sport, not a knock on that thing, but it is very expensive, and that does make this look like at least a bit of a bargain. To recap, I like the way the Pathfinder Rock Creek looks, the extra towing capacity it's got compared to most SUVs like it, and how straightforward it is inside. I don't like the stiff ride, the lack of interior character, or that it's a little expensive for what's essentially a mid-grade trim with some subtle upgrades. The stiff ride and so-so interior materials are probably the biggest shortcomings here, which is equal parts praiseworthy and problematic. More generally, though, the Pathfinder Rock Creek has something most entries like it don't, and that's character. The drive itself, it's nothing if not unique, and it looks great, especially with this paint. It also happens to have at least a little more capacity for adventure than the average SUV this size. Add it all up, and what's here is a pretty special sport utility that nails the essentials with just a little attitude tossed in for good measure.